poor girl offers to take care of her boss's sick daughter, and the millionaire watches her, and what he decides next, no one expected. The entire audience looked at her with contempt as the girl in a simple uniform and worn shoes crossed the mansion's ballroom, carrying the little girl in her arms. "You're not touching my daughter with those dirty hands," the millionaire shouted before all the guests. The music stopped. The wealthy, haughty people froze, glasses in hand. She, blushing with embarrassment, tried to explain that she only held her because the girl had a fever, but he stepped forward and snatched the child from her arms. "You're just the temporary nanny, a poor opportunist. Don't forget your place." The veiled laughter, the malicious whispers and the disapproving looks fell upon her like a storm of glass. With tears in her eyes, she bowed her head and left, still hearing his voice echo, "People like you should never have set foot in here." But what no one there knew is that that was the last day she would accept being diminished. Months later, the same man rushed into the hospital, desperate for answers. His daughter had been admitted in critical condition, and the doctors were worried. But as he opened the door to the pediatric ICU, he froze. Standing beside the girl's bed, tenderly holding her hand and giving firm instructions to the staff, was the very young woman he had humiliated in front of everyone. Only now. She was wearing a white lab coat with a name tag, chief director of the pediatric ward of the most renowned private hospital in the state. He couldn't understand. It wasn't possible. How was the poor nanny, the woman he'd treated like trash, there, with power, respect, and authority? The truth was, she'd always been more than he'd imagined, and he was about to discover that his arrogance had alienated him from the one person who could save his daughter, and perhaps himself. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. In the Lancaster mansion, the silence was always punctuated by curt commands, clinking glasses, and the hurried footsteps of servants trying not to make a mistake. The atmosphere was impeccable, sterile of feelings but full of appearances. At the center of that world, Thomas Lancaster, CEO of an investment conglomerate, kept his daughter Emily isolated among tutors, doctors, and nannies, as if every emotion surrounding the girl could be converted into an asset or a threat. He didn't smile easily, and when he did, it was a rehearsed gesture for the cameras. The girl's mother, who died 3 years ago, had left a void that he filled with power, not presence. Emily suffered silently from the real absence of affection, hidden among expensive toys and a routine as rigid as a spreadsheet. That's when the new caretaker arrived. She wore worn jeans, worn sneakers, and a serene gaze that clashed with everything else inside. Her name was Anna Rivera. She had a calm, firm demeanor and seemed more concerned with listening than with impressing. The housekeeper wrinkled her nose. "She looks like she just stepped off a Bronx bus," she whispered to another employee. But Thomas, distracted by a phone call about mergers and layoffs, didn't even glance at the new hire. To him, she was just another temporary replacement. Anna entered Emily's room with a heavy heart. The girl was curled up, in the corner of the bed, holding a teddy bear. "Hi, Emily, can I sit here?" Anna said softly. The girl glanced at her sideways, suspicious. She didn't say much, but there was something about this strange nanny, a sincere calm that permeated the room. In the days that followed, Anna won Emily's heart not with gifts, but with her presence. She read stories, listened to her trembling words, respected her silence. She cared for her, as one would care for something that had already broken once. But all this closeness was viewed with discomfort by Thomas, who judged the young woman by her background, her simple clothes, her overly serene manner. "She's unqualified," he commented to his secretary. "She's here out of charity, and charity doesn't raise an heiress." It was a Saturday that everything exploded, a formal brunch with investors and socialites. Emily woke up feverish and vomiting, but her father's plans remained unchanged. "She needs to show up. It's part of the company's image. Just clean her up and dress her nicely." Anna tried to reason. "Mr. Lancaster, she needs to rest. She has a fever, and I didn't ask for your opinion. Dress her." Hours later, as the guests toasted around the pool, Emily fainted on the lawn, trembling. Without thinking, Anna scooped her up in her arms and ran into the house. The scene was seen by everyone, and that's when Thomas publicly humiliated her, like a wounded lion protecting its pride in front of the elite. But there, in that cold marble house where no one saw souls in anyone, a seed of change was born. A girl began to feel affection. A man blinded by status slowly began to hear his own silences, and a young woman who seemed invisible to the world planted something no amount of money could buy: quiet dignity, because even though she was despised, she knew what she was doing there. And that was just the beginning. Ana Rivera's past was beyond words. She grew up in one of the most marginalized areas of Newark, New Jersey, where the sound of sirens was more constant than birdsong. Her father abandoned them when she was 5. Her mother, sick and frail, washed clothes to support Anna and her 2 younger brothers. She ate whatever was left over. She studied under a streetlight on the corner because the house's power was frequently cut off. She was humiliated many times by teachers, by peers, by adults who saw her as just another statistic. But there was a flame within her, something no amount of misery could extinguish: the desire to care. From an early age, Anna wanted to be a doctor, not for the glory or the pay, but because one day, at 8, she saw her mother nearly die in front of her and felt helpless. The image of her suffocating while a neighbor called 911 branded her like a hot iron. That night, she promised herself never again would she be without the power to help someone. Anna was brilliant. She got a full scholarship to a technical school, then to a public university. She worked as a waitress at night, studied in the wee hours, and took care of her siblings in the morning. She slept 3 hours a day. She rejected parties, dating, any luxury. Her only luxury was dreaming. In her final year of medical school, she lost her mother to advanced cancer. Anna was in the ICU when she passed away, holding her hand. She cried silently, then returned to the classroom. Because she knew her diploma wasn't just hers, it was the legacy of those who fought for it with their very bones. But the real world was cruel. Even after graduating, she couldn't find a permanent position. Doctors from elite universities occupied the best positions. Discriminated against for her heritage, her Latino surname, and her simple clothing, Anna took temporary jobs while waiting for a real opportunity. She worked as a caregiver, a pharmacy assistant, a nanny, even with her diploma intact. That's how the ad appeared at the agency. Wanted: temporary caregiver with experience with children, mansion in Manhattan. A limited contact, payment immediately. She hesitated, but when she saw the name Lancaster in the address, her heart stopped. Because Anna knew exactly who Thomas Lancaster was, not because he was a tycoon, but because 3 years earlier, at a blood bank, he had anonymously donated a rare blood type to save a girl involved in a domestic accident. The child's name was Emily Lancaster, and from that day on, Anna never forgot those frightened, fragile eyes. When she saw the family name again, she understood that their meeting wasn't chance, it was destiny. She took the job not out of necessity, but for a purpose she couldn't quite explain. Deep down, I wanted to see if that girl was okay. I wanted to confirm with my own eyes that what you did was worth it. That saving a life had created another. What Anna didn't expect was the wall of arrogance she would encounter on the other side of the door, and even less so, that her painful past would soon be the key to a turnaround that would shake the very foundations of Lancaster Mansion. The mood that morning was muggy and heavy, as if the air knew something was about to happen. Thomas Lancaster was hosting a private event at his mansion, an exclusive brunch to seal a billion-dollar partnership with Silicon Valley investors. The garden was immaculate. Trained waiters moved between tables with military precision, violinists were positioned on the deck, and the name Lancaster Holdings was emblazoned on every detail. Emily, however, was pale, her eyes sunken, and her hands cold. Anna noticed the second she came down for breakfast. She touched her forehead and felt the feverish heat rising like a silent alarm. She looked for the housekeeper, who ignored her. Then she went up to the office and knocked on Thomas's door. "Emily has a high fever. I don't think it's safe to expose her to the sun, much less leave her in public like this." He didn't even look up from his laptop. "She'll take an antipyretic. I need her to be there. Her image conveys emotional stability. That's bigger than you can understand." Anna insisted, "It's not about image, it's about health." That's when he looked at her dryly. "You're paid to obey. Do your job." Anna returned to her room, torn between medical ethics and the fear of losing the job that paid for her brother's treatment, a victim of multiple sclerosis. She took a deep breath, bathed the girl, fed her carefully, and kept her away from the commotion as much as possible. But early in the afternoon, Emily slipped from her chair while trying to get up and fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Her lips were purple. Anna screamed. She ran to her, scooped up the child, and crossed the crowded hall toward the inner wing of the mansion, passing socialites and executives with the unconscious girl in their arms. It was at that exact moment that everything collapsed. Thomas saw the scene and, overcome with rage and shame in front of his guests, advanced brutally. "What do you think you're doing?" Anna tried to explain. "She fainted. She's burning with fever. She needs help." But he interrupted her with a dry shout. "Let go of my daughter. Who do you think you are, touching her like that in front of everyone? This isn't a public hospital." A tense silence fell. Everyone stopped. The music stopped. Anna still held Emily carefully. "I'm a doctor." The words came out softly but firmly. He laughed derisively. "Doctor? You? Dressed like that? Like that? Are you trying to scam someone? You're just another opportunist out for my money." The words fell like a sentence. Anna handed Emily over to the nurse who had arrived and, with teary eyes, looked at Thomas one last time. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He only left, in front of everyone, with the dignity of someone who knew he had done the right thing. But as the guests tried to hide their discomfort, a prominent investor who had witnessed the scene whispered in Thomas's ear, "She has more nobility in her eyes than you have in all your millions." And in that instant, even though he wouldn't admit it, something inside him cracked. 3 days before that fateful brunch, Anna had had her first direct encounter with Thomas Lancaster. It wasn't a planned encounter, nor a pleasant one. She was in the house library reading a children's book to Emily when she heard his deep voice echo from the hallway. "Are you the new nanny?" He entered unsmiling, with his arms crossed and a clinical look. "Yes." "Sir, my name is Anna." He studied her face like someone examining a painting they dislike, but must keep on the wall for convenience. "Where did you go to school?" he asked. "SUNY, pre-med." Thomas frowned, disinterested. "You don't look like a doctor." Anna suppressed her discomfort. "Appearances don't always reveal essence." The sentence hung in the air, like a provocation. He smiled coldly. "I don't want you to confuse your roles. Here, you're a caregiver. You're not here to diagnose or advise. Just do as you're told." She nodded without looking down. Emily, on her lap, squeezed her hand. Thomas noticed that gesture with a twinge of something he didn't understand. Discomfort. In the days that followed, he began to observe her from afar. He reviewed the house's cameras and saw Anna teaching the girl how to plant a seedling in the garden, playing the guitar in the late afternoon, tending to Emily's hair with the delicacy of someone caring for something fragile. It irritated him. To him, it was a waste of time. Emily needed to learn French, coding, economics, not touch dirt with her hands or play guessing games. "This woman will turn my daughter into a weakling," he told himself, ignoring the fact that the child smiled more now than she had in the entire last year. One night, Anna needed to administer a nebulizer to Emily. Thomas entered the room just as she was holding the mask and stroking her daughter's face. "Are you medicating my daughter without permission?" Anna stood up. "She has the onset of bronchitis. I've already prepared the chart and can show you the symptoms. The nurse is away, and I waited for an answer that never came." He took 2 steps forward. "You act as if this is your house, as if you know what's best for her." Anna took a deep breath. "I only do what I think is right, sir, even if it costs me my job." He was silent for a few seconds. Emily coughed, and the sound filled the room like a living reminder. Finally, he turned without a word and left. That night, however, Thomas didn't sleep. He watched through the cameras as Anna sat beside her daughter all night, silently reading a book by flashlight while the girl slept. For the first time, a disconcerting thought crossed his mind. What if this simple, modestly dressed woman was doing for his daughter what even he couldn't do? Saturday brunch was the kind of event where fake smiles were worth more than signed contracts. The guests, all dressed in tailored suits, paraded, champagne flutes like ego trophies. Thomas Lancaster was in his element, surrounded by sycophants, discreet cameras, and talk of stocks, mergers, and privatizations. Emily, visibly haggard, wore a pale blue dress with white bows. Her face was pale, but she smiled as she'd been trained. Anna followed closely, watchful, anxious. She'd tried 3 times to convince Thomas to let the girl rest, but had been brushed off with phrases like, "She's strong, she'll get used to it," and "This teaches her." Social discipline. When Emily began to sweat and feel dizzy, Anna asked permission to take her to her room. Thomas responded in front of 2 investors. "You think you know more about my daughter than I do? Stay where you are." Then came the moment when everything burned. Emily stumbled and fell to the grass, her eyes rolling back, her skin clammy and cold. Without waiting, Anna rushed forward, knelt, and scooped her up in her arms. The murmur among the guests turned to a buzz of attention. She crossed the room, weaving between tables, excusing herself in a shaky voice, and that's when Thomas exploded. He crossed the lawn, shoved a waiter trying to help, and shouted, "Stop! Let go of my daughter!" Everyone turned. The laughter stopped. The music faded. Anna, with Emily passed out in her arms, replied, "She needs help now." But Thomas was blind. The image of a dirt and sweat-smeared nanny walking through his $1,000,000 reception was more than he could bear. "You have no right. You're nobody. I should call security to get you out of here." Eyes turned not to Anna but to him. The guests, previously complicit in the social game, began to feel uneasy. One of the women whispered, "She saved the girl." One of the investors glared at him with veiled contempt, but Thomas didn't notice. Struck with pride, he pointed to the door. "You're fired, now." Anna didn't argue. She lowered her eyes, handed Emily to the nurse, and left silently. She walked the length of the room, with her head held high but her eyes brimming with tears. A woman murmured as she passed, "Poor thing, always trying to show off." Anna heard but didn't react. As she left through the front door, Thomas uttered one last, ice-cold sentence, "I hope I never see you near my daughter again." The door slammed, and outside Anna felt the wind blow on her face, tasting both freedom and pain. Because even though she'd been humiliated, she knew. She did the right thing. She saved a life, and planted the seed of something none of those millionaires would understand. The truth doesn't shout. It waits and returns. That same evening, while Thomas was still celebrating the contract numbers, Anna sat silently in her small rented room in Harlem, her lab coat folded over her knees and her cell phone on airplane mode. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming. She just stared at the ceiling in absolute silence, as if meditating on everything she'd chosen to endure in silence. Her childhood friend, Rebecca, came in with 2 cups of tea. "You got fired?" Anna nodded. "And what are you going to do?" She looked out the window. "Wait, he'll find out, sooner or later." And she was right. On Monday, the housekeeper called, frantic. Emily wouldn't get out of bed, refused food, wouldn't talk to anyone. She just held the bear Anna had given her. Thomas, at a loss, called 3 specialists. None of them could calm the girl. He became angry, yelled at the staff, and demanded solutions. Until one of the doctors suggested bluntly, "She's suffered a trauma. The nanny was a security figure for her. Removing her like this may have caused more than you realize." He didn't answer. He simply locked himself in his office, staring silently at the camera showing his daughter's room. It was then that, rummaging through the hospital's papers, he found a file Anna had left behind, Emily's medical record from that morning. Next to it was a note. "I wasn't hired to care for hearts. but I did what I had to. Because I've been where she is, alone, scared, waiting for someone to hear what I couldn't say. Thomas felt something hurt inside him. For the first time in years, it wasn't anger. It was guilt. The next morning, he went to the private hospital where Anna had mentioned she'd worked temporary shifts. A receptionist confirmed, "Dr. Rivera, yes, she's worked here before, but she was dismissed for being overqualified for a caregiving contract. Do you want me to check if she left a number?" Thomas shook his head. He didn't know what he was looking for. He only knew he needed to find her. But Anna didn't want to be found. Not now. She had chosen to disappear. And he, for the first time, discovered what it was like to feel the absence of someone he hadn't even had the courage to get to know properly. Anna, on the other side of town, returned to her shifts silently. She cared for others. She saved lives without asking for applause. And at night, she dreamed of a little girl holding her hand. Tightly. She knew Thomas had discovered the note. She knew that in time he would understand. Because the truth always finds its way back. The morning after Anna's silent disappearance, Thomas Lancaster was strangely restless. For the first time in a long time, he ignored the financial reports piled on his desk and stared for long minutes at the house's security camera monitor. In the old recordings, he saw scenes that had previously meant nothing to him. Anna gently combing Emily's hair, the two of them dancing in the garden under the morning sun, the girl for the first time in months bursting into spontaneous laughter as they painted the garage wall with washable paint, something he'd immediately ordered erased. But now, watching it all again, something changed in his eyes. This woman had done more than just get a job done. She had filled spaces he hadn't even known were empty. Overcome by a strange uneasiness, Thomas began to search through the house records. He asked the secretary for Anna's hiring information, combed through emails, contracts, and files. He finally discovered that her full last name was Ana Lucia Rivera. The name sounded familiar. He typed it into his computer, and when the first search page appeared, he froze. There she was, smiling in an image from a medical NGO's website, in a white lab coat, holding a baby in a refugee camp. Dr. Ana Rivera, graduated with honors from the State University of New York, specialized in emergency pediatrics. Served on humanitarian missions in rural Guatemala, Honduras, and Haiti. And below a highlighted quote from her, "Saving a life is different from curing a disease. Saving a life is listening, looking, and remaining." Thomas felt a strange chill in his stomach. How had he not realized who she was? How had he allowed himself to treat her as inferior, when in reality she had built with sweat, pain, and sacrifice everything he thought could only be bought with money? Continuing his search, he found an article she had published in a medical journal. In the footnote it read, "It was thanks to the anonymous blood donation I received at age 21 that I understood the value of life as a gift. Since then, I have dedicated my life to repaying the gesture that saved me." He stood still, silent. His mind began connecting the dots with cruel speed, and then, like a blade cutting an invisible thread, the memory came back. 3 years ago, when Emily had a domestic accident and needed an urgent transfusion of rare blood. The hospital couldn't find a compatible donor, but an anonymous donor appeared at the last minute and saved his daughter. He never thanked her. He never wanted to know who it was. To him, it was just another hospital obligation. But now everything made sense. Anna, the same rare blood type, the deep look in her eyes when she saw Emily for the first time, the inexplicable affection, the urgency in her care. She knew, she always knew, and he, blinded by arrogance, saw her only as a threat to his pride. Thomas stood up with trembling hands. He got into his car and drove to the NGO mentioned on the website. There, he found an assistant who greeted him cautiously. "Dr. Rivera is on leave, but I can leave a message." He hesitated. "Can you tell me if she's okay?" The woman eyed him suspiciously. She said she needed some time, that she'd reached the end of her tether. Thomas lowered his gaze. "She took care of my daughter, and I kicked her out." The assistant took a deep breath. She knew who you were from day one. And yet, she decided to go into that house. Thomas left, unsure how to deal with what he had discovered. For the first time in years, he felt true shame. Not the social kind, but the kind that arises when someone recognizes their own smallness in the face of another human being's silent greatness. Anna was no ordinary caregiver. She was a woman who had chosen compassion even when hurt, care even when discarded. And he had lost. Something that all the money in the world couldn't buy back. From a young age, Thomas Lancaster had become accustomed to the process of acquiring and replacing. Friends, businesses, properties, political alliances, for him, everything was a matter of control, possession, and efficiency. But after discovering who Ana Rivera truly was, something inside him silently broke and began to crumble irreversibly. In the days that followed, his house seemed larger, emptier. Emily refused to leave her room. The girl, once introspective, now maintained an unsettling silence, as if waiting for something he couldn't provide. No new toy, no planned outing, no specialized doctor could undo Anna's palpable absence. For the first week, Thomas still tried to rationalize. She made a choice, she's gone, I didn't need her here. But her absence became increasingly present. Every room in the house seemed to carry the soft shadow of that woman with the calm voice and steady eyes. Even the flowers in the garden seemed paler without the quiet laughter that accompanied them in the mornings. The household staff began to comment among themselves. I've never seen the girl so quiet. The housekeeper, who had previously turned up her nose at Anna, now sighed. She had a way with the child, a way no one else has. Thomas began to act differently. He cancelled trips, declined invitations, and began going out less. In fact, he began observing more. And in his growing solitude, a restlessness took shape. Who was he without his titles? What kind of man was he raising his daughter to become? Emily, fragile and silent, eyed him suspiciously. He tried to talk, but didn't know how. He tried to hug her, but his arms felt heavy, robotic, incapable of showing genuine affection. One night, trying to force a moment together, he offered to read a book. She declined in a small voice. That story, only Anna could tell. The second week, Thomas went to Emily's school to pick her up. He saw other mothers and fathers, waiting with flowers, lunchboxes, and wide smiles. He felt like an intruder in that simple world. Seeing his daughter leave the classroom, he ran to her with a candy in his hand. I bought your favorite. Emily took the candy, but said without emotion, Anna made cupcakes at home, these are only from the store. He stood there, swallowing hard. It wasn't the candy. It was the gesture. It was the love in the details. Something he never knew how to cultivate. In the third week, already dejected and more introspective than ever, Thomas returned to the hospital where Anna appeared in voluntary records. He tried to speak to the administration, tried to deliver a letter, but she was nowhere to be seen. Some said she'd returned to the NGO, others that she'd traveled to care for a friend's mother. She had disappeared as if she'd never existed. But everything about her remained. The soft scent on Emily's clothes, the books she'd left organized on the children's bookshelf, the activity diary, with notes like, Emily learned to listen to the sounds of the wind today. She smiled with her eyes. It was at this point that Thomas finally understood that Anna hadn't just passed through their lives. She had transformed them, and he had let this transformation slip away out of sheer pride. What destroyed him most wasn't the mistake itself. It was the impossibility of fixing what had been done in public, cruelly, before so many eyes. Anna had disappeared without revenge, without fanfare. And her silence was more powerful than any accusation. It was a silence that echoed within him every day, an emptiness that constantly reminded him of the man he had been, and the man he might yet try to become if she would ever give him a second chance. The echo of one's own mistakes has a peculiar sound. It doesn't scream but corrodes. And in Thomas Lancaster's case, this sound began to be heard not only inside his silent mansion, but outside as well. The business world, once so safe and predictable, for him began to crack at the edges, but not because of numbers or contracts, but because of something more delicate: image. After the event in which he publicly expelled Anna, one of the guests had discreetly filmed the scene, not out of malice, but out of habit. And like everything in the modern world, the video, even unintentionally, eventually leaked. An intern from one of the companies present at the brunch posted the recording in a private group with the caption, "The CEO who yells at nannies in public." Someone laughed. Another shared it. Within 48 hours, the recording had reached parenting forums, then anonymous social media profiles. In less than a week, it was on an activism page called Corporate Humanity. In the video, Thomas was clearly seen yelling at Anna, pointing his finger, as she held a visibly weak child in her arms. Comments exploded. "This man has lost all sense of humanity. She was saving his daughter. Money has gone to his head to the point where he doesn't recognize true love." What had once been his strength, the image of an unyielding, ruthless, and domineering CEO, was now his downfall. Lancaster Holdings shares didn't immediately drop, but the expressions of partners and board members changed. Investors' smiles became forced, and the words of one board member at a meeting were clear. "We're no longer in an era where power justifies cruelty, Thomas. People want human leaders." Thomas tried to hush up the incident. He hired a publicist and sent lawyers to pressure the websites that released the video, but to no avail. Anna, on the other hand, didn't say a single word. She didn't speak out. She didn't file a lawsuit. She didn't reappear. Her absence only fueled the collective imagination. Who was this woman who endured such humiliation in silence? And what's more, why did she leave without screaming, without attacking? That made her even bigger. Magazines started writing articles like "The Medical Nanny Who Was Humiliated by a Billionaire and Disappeared." Newspapers investigated his story. They discovered his background, his humanitarian actions, his difficult past. And then came the story that finally shattered Thomas's shield, an article published in the New York Times with the headline, "The Woman Who Saved the Tycoon's Daughter," and got fired for it. The report revealed everything: that Anna had donated blood years earlier to save Emily, anonymously, that she was later hired without revealing her identity, and that, even so, after all that, she never asked for anything in return. The report included a quote from her, taken from an old interview: "The world changes not when we shout, but when we choose not to return hate to what hurts us." The public condemnation was immediate. Thousands of comments poured in on the company's social media. "Where's your apology? What kind of father humiliates someone who saves his daughter? You're not worthy of the child you have." And then, something even more painful happened. Emily began to feel the weight of this rejection. Classmates whispered. Teachers looked on with pity. The girl began to withdraw. Thomas was called into a meeting. He heard from a guidance counselor. "Your daughter needs emotional stability. She's lost her emotional role model. She's closing herself off in a cocoon that may take years to break." He left the school as if carrying a building on his shoulders. That night, alone in his office, Thomas stared at the image of Anna holding Emily in the garden, a still frame taken from the house's cameras. Beside it, on his desk, lay the note she'd left with the medical records. He reread it for the 10th time, and this time he cried. For his daughter, for the public embarrassment, but most of all, and for everything he could have done differently but didn't. The public downfall had exposed the internal cracks Thomas had always hidden beneath the veneer of success. But what destabilized him most wasn't the loss of credibility, the silent stares of his partners, or even the pressure from the press. What truly broke him was watching his daughter grow emotionally ill day after day, a living mirror of the consequences of his choices. Emily no longer drew, no longer smiled, no longer wanted to go on weekend outings. Every attempt Thomas made to reach out was met with an invisible wall of suppressed sadness, and it was on a rainy Sunday, when he tried to make pancakes for her and was met with a "Anna could do it better," that something in his chest finally broke. He didn't explode, he didn't scream. He just sat at the table and cried silently. Emily stood there, uncomprehending. It was the first time she'd seen her father. Human. He didn't know what to say. He simply held her hand, trembling, and said, "I messed up, daughter, and I'm trying to fix it." It was the beginning of a crack in his armor he never imagined he'd go through. In the following weeks, Thomas began to change, not as an image strategy, but as a sincere attempt to rebuild something he couldn't name. He left the company's operational management in the hands of the board and began attending therapy sessions. For the first time, he spoke about his wife's death, not to justify his coldness, but to understand the pain he'd never had the courage to face. He began to participate in Emily's routine. He took her to school, picked her up, listened to her little phrases. It took him weeks to make her smile, even a little. He reorganized the house. He had a children's library installed. He allowed the girl to paint one of the walls with drawings, as Anna did on improvised paper. He hired an art teacher, not a French teacher. He changed the rigid schedule for a more relaxed routine. The employees found it strange, the market found it strange, but he didn't explain anything to anyone. Because deep down he knew this change was intimate. It was between him and himself. He looked again for the NGO where Anna had worked, but she was no longer there. He went to the university where she studied and spoke with former professors. He discovered that she had turned down invitations to elite hospitals because she didn't want to abandon her work in vulnerable areas. He discovered that she had paid for her own studies by washing dishes, that she had a sick brother, and that part of the money she had earned in the mansion had gone to buy medicine. Each piece of that story further deconstructed the arrogant image he had of the world. And more than that, it deconstructed him as a man. He began writing a letter, not a formal letter, nor one intended to justify himself, a sincere letter. He wrote and rewrote dozens of times. He tore pages, cried mid-sentence, trying to find the right words. "Anna, I never knew how to look beyond what I could control. I never knew how to recognize greatness that didn't wear a suit jacket. But you taught me, not with shouting nor with hurt, with the rarest form of revolution, compassion." He ended the letter by saying, "If I can ever be worthy of looking into your eyes again, I will know I am on the right path." He left the letter at the hospital where she had last worked in a sealed envelope. He didn't ask for a reply. He didn't expect a response. But he needed to say it. He needed her to know. Because now, more than ever, Thomas understood that redemption isn't begged for. It's built. In silence. With actions. And with time. And even if she never forgave him, he had decided he would. Never be the man she knew again. The reunion wasn't planned, and perhaps that's why it was perfect in its imperfection. It was autumn, and the cold wind was already beginning to cover the Manhattan sidewalks with golden leaves. Thomas had taken Emily to Central Park as part of his new habit of dedicating weekends exclusively to her. He carried a small backpack with juice, snacks, and a children's book. Now he memorized the stories he'd previously left in the hands of babysitters. Emily, little by little, was smiling again. Not often, not completely, but genuinely. Her eyes were no longer so dull. It was as if she were rebuilding herself. And Thomas, along with her. As they walked toward a clearing near the lake, they heard a soft voice reading aloud to a group of children sitting on the grass. Thomas dismissed it at first, but Emily stopped. Her eyes lit up immediately. She dropped her backpack and ran. Anna! The world stopped in that instant. Anna, sitting under a tree with a book, open on her lap, looked up in alarm. And then she smiled. A shy, restrained smile, but so genuine it seemed to warm the icy air. Emily threw herself into her arms with the intensity of someone who finds peace again. Anna hugged her tightly, as if reclaiming something she never wanted to leave behind. The other children watched curiously. Thomas stood still, meters away, his heart pounding like never before. He was seeing that woman for the first time with the right eyes, without the filter of arrogance, without the fog of pride. She hadn't changed at all, but he was no longer the same man who had thrown her out of his home. Anna stood slowly, Emily still holding her hand. Her eyes met Thomas's. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He approached slowly without rehearsing his words. He didn't extend his hand. He simply said, "Did you get my letter?" She nodded. The silence between them was thick, but not hostile. It was the silence of someone who has much to say, but chooses to wait for the right moment. Thomas looked at his daughter, then at Anna. "She misses you every day, and so do I." Anna watched him calmly. There was no anger. There was no rancor. There was a deep serenity in her eyes, as if she knew this reunion wasn't about revenge, but about restoration. Emily tugged at his hand. "Can you come with us? Dad doesn't know how to do the dragon's voice in the story." Anna laughed for the first time, a short laugh, but one with symbolic weight. Thomas took a deep breath. "If you'd just like to walk with us, no strings attached, we'd be happy." Anna hesitated. She looked at the group of children behind her, at Emily's fallen backpack, at the man who was now taking off his masks. Then she bent down, picked up the book she was reading, and said to the girl, "Shall we finish this story first?" Emily smiled. Thomas sat down on the grass without asking permission. And there they stayed, the three of them, as if time had stopped to allow for this pause. In destiny. There was no formal apology. There was no discussion of the past. The reunion was silent, discreet, and delicate. But in that moment, Thomas knew he had been forgiven. And Anna, even without saying it, understood that she had planted something that was now blossoming unexpectedly. Justice didn't come with punishment. It came with awareness. And the reunion, in its simplicity, was the beginning of a new story, written in pages that only time could reveal. The end of that afternoon in the park seemed hand-woven by something greater than chance. Anna walked beside Thomas and Emily, as if crossing a field between two worlds, the one she had left behind, and the one that now silently opened before her. The leaves crunched underfoot, the trees filtered the last golden rays of sunlight, and each step felt like a compass of reconciliation. There were no declarations, there were no promises, there was only the lightness of the moment. But even amid the serene beauty of the scene, Anna knew the time had come to make a decision. She couldn't simply return as if nothing had happened. Forgiveness and return are not the same thing, and she, more than anyone, knew the value of her own dignity. After walking for almost an hour, they found a secluded wooden bench. Emily ran to a nearby tree to gather dry leaves, leaving the two adults face to face. Anna sat down first. Thomas, hesitant, sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is for you. It's just a letter. No proposal, no request. Just what I've felt these past few months." Anna didn't touch the envelope. She simply said softly, "I read your first letter. It was more than words. It was a visible change in your daughter." Thomas looked at his hands. They were trembling. "I thought I was a good father for providing, for keeping everything in order. But you showed me that order can be cruel. That presence is worth more than protection, and that affection can't be bought." Anna listened in silence. When he finished, she met his eyes for the first time with complete truth. "You weren't the first to look at me as if I were less than, but you were the only one who had the courage to change after that." The silence that followed was filled only with the soft sounds of Emily laughing through the leaves. Thomas clutched the envelope between his fingers. "Do you want to go back?" The question came out raw, unadorned but sincere. Anna took a deep breath. She looked at the girl, then up at the sky as if weighing the world. "Wanting isn't the same as being able." He leaned in slightly. "What do you mean?" Anna looked at him tenderly and firmly. "I forgive you. I truly do. I hold no grudge, nor do I desire revenge. But going back would be like erasing what I learned in this process. You needed to fall. I needed to leave. And Emily needed to see that love shouldn't accept humiliation as its price." Thomas nodded silently. He didn't argue. He lowered his gaze, in respect. And in that act he showed he had truly changed. "I can be around, we can talk, I can see her from time to time, but I won't be back as a babysitter or as part of the household. Maybe one day as a friend or something more, but right now, no." She stood, took the envelope from his hand and smiled. You still have so much to build with her, and I have other children waiting for me elsewhere." Emily came running back, showing off the leaves she'd collected. "Look, Anna, a heart." The leaf was indeed shaped like a heart. Anna took it gently, kissed the girl's forehead and said, "You're the most beautiful heart I've ever seen." Thomas watched her say goodbye. No tears, no promises. Only with the dignity of someone who chose to love without losing themselves. And as he watched her walk away, he realized that sometimes the greatest proof of forgiveness is precisely not returning. It's letting the other grow from absence. It's allowing love to teach, but not bind. And in that moment, Thomas knew this was no ordinary goodbye. It was a silent decision, but a powerful one. Months had passed since that autumn afternoon in the park. Winter arrived, blanketing Manhattan with a silent whiteness, as if the world were asking for a pause. The city continued its hurried pace, but in the Lancaster mansion everything had changed. Not in the furniture, the artwork, or the silverware, but in the gestures, in the presence, in the way Thomas now waited for Emily at the school door with an extra scarf in hand, in the way he truly listened to her every word, even when they were just children's stories about dragons and singing flowers. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It was built with silence, with small acts, with quiet regret, and Anna's absence was still felt, but now not as a paralyzing void. It was like a mark left by someone who passed through their lives like a steady breeze, teaching without needing to stay. One Saturday morning, Emily rushed into Thomas's office with a colorful envelope. "Daddy, a letter from Anna." He carefully picked up the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was just a card. No printed text, just a photograph. Emily in Anna's arms, taken by someone in the park that day of their reunion. On the back of the photo, a single handwritten sentence. "Some stories don't need endings, just respect." Thomas smiled, moved. He said nothing. He stood, went to the bookshelf, and silently placed the photo in a frame next to an old picture of his late wife and baby daughter. Emily watched, not fully understanding, but with a light heart. She took the necklace of colorful beads Anna had left with her, the same one Thomas had once called cheap stuff, and put it around her neck. "Can I wear it today?" Thomas nodded. "Of course, it's your treasure." Late in the afternoon, they walked together to the garden. The snow was already melting, and the first buds of spring were discreetly appearing. Emily planted a new sunflower seedling. Thomas knelt beside her and helped. They didn't talk about the past, but every gesture between them carried the scars and lessons of what they had experienced. As he stood, Thomas looked to the horizon and said softly, as if speaking to someone no longer there but still listening, "Thank you." And then the wind blew lightly. A dry leaf swirled through the air and landed at Emily's feet, in the shape of a heart. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched your heart in some way. So tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven like she did, or would you have turned your back forever? I'd really like to hear your opinion. Please leave a like and enjoy. It really helps the channel reach more people with stories like this, full of emotion and reflection. If you're not already subscribed, click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss any future stories. And look, there's a video playing on the screen right now that it needs watch. It's an even stronger story with a twist no one saw coming. Click on it and get ready, because the ending will give you goosebumps.